Let me introduce Dave Parker, who is a 5-time entrepreneur, CEO of Code Fellows, board member, and former VC. He was the SVP of programs at UP Global and runs Seattle Startup Week. He's an active member of the startup community, and his best gig is as a husband and dad.
There you go.
Introducing Dave Parker.
Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate it. Keep the mic.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, I see some familiar faces. It's great. Thanks. It's always good. Thanks for the invite to come back. And so a couple of updates since that. So I switched back to the dark side again. So I'm back to being a VC. So after I stayed with Code Fellows for about 2 years and then transitioned to the board and crossed over to the dark side and joined Seven Peaks Ventures, which is a Bend, Oregon-based fund. We'll talk about funds and sources of capital as we go through some. But so yeah, and mostly spend most of my time as a board member and as an investor these days. So which is, gives me a chance to second guess your deck instead of somebody second guessing my deck for a change. So which is all good. So I'll blow through a little bit about me. I'm going to walk you through just kind of ecosystems in general to give you context for the Seattle ecosystem, and then talk about the Seattle ecosystem, the resources that are there for you. But then also at the end, just really talk about you. Like, how do you plug into this ecosystem? So, and walk you through that, and feel free if you have questions as you go, happy to do it. All right, first off, welcome everyone. One of the quirky things about community is that nobody owns it. And every once in a while I'll run into somebody like, we want our thing to be the epicenter of the startup community in Seattle. And I'm like, you do know by definition that's not community. Like, nobody actually owns community. We are all part of it. So I get to influence it because I've been doing it a long time. Some of you are new to it. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Some people moved from San Francisco and become part of it, and the answer is welcome. We're glad you're here. But there's this quirky thing about community. I don't know if you guys know about community, you may have it in your families. There's that crazy uncle that hangs out at Thanksgiving. And there's the community involves everybody, and some of us are easy to get along with, and some of us maybe aren't. But the thing about community is you have to accept everybody who's part of it. It doesn't mean you're going to get along with all of them, but it does mean you have to accept the fact that they're all part of it. And as you do this for a while, one of the things you learn is oh, I know something about that community, and I know something about these players. And one of the things we've done as a group of community leaders is we occasionally get together and actually say, we need to go talk to that person, because what they're doing actually doesn't really help the community. And somebody's like, oh, you're blackballing people? I'm like, no, we're just providing some guardrails. Because there's some things in the community that's not super useful to you as a founder, and it's good that you know them rather than have to go learn them. And you shouldn't have to learn them the hard way. So, but the general message is welcome to everybody. So some resources, and this is up on SlideShare. So if you want to go look for SlideShare and look for Dave Parker, you'll find this deck is there. I think we'll get it circulated here as well. But all of these links are live for you. So there's one of the things we worked on when I was with Up Global. And Up Global was the merger of Startup Weekend and Startup America. So we did events in 120 countries. So my last full year there before we sold it to Techstars, we did 1,265 events worldwide with 74,000 attendees in about 460 cities. So one of the things we did with Google was we wrote a white paper around what are the 5 ingredients of a startup community and what makes a startup community viable. So these are the ingredients. If you want to read more about the white paper, you can definitely go there as a resource. It's a great resource if you're concerned or wondering about community. There's also other resources in the Startup Champions Network, which is kind of the legacy of Startup America. And folks who are really involved with being part of how do we help build communities for startups within the ecosystem and for various scale and size. Seattle obviously has momentum around being a startup community, but there's cities that I'll give you examples of that are much smaller than Seattle as well. So the other resources there is Brad Feld's book is also on SlideShare. It's called Startup Community. So if you don't want to buy the book, you want to do the SlideShare, go for that. And Brad writes about this concept of the Boulder thesis. And the Boulder thesis was, how do you build a startup community around a small town? And if anybody been to Boulder before? Boulder's not a huge place. It's crazy, actually, that Boulder has been as successful as it's been. And part of it is Brad continues to stay involved in that community. And I think there's a lot of folks in Seattle that are kind of above the community, and there's a lot of us who are in the community. And one of the things I would encourage you as you grow and sell your company and exit, continue to be involved in the community, because it's by giving back and being part of the community that we get to actually contribute to others around us. The last one there is I would just give you Iowa City as an example. A few years ago, I don't know if you remember, 8 or 10 years ago, Iowa City had a massive flood downtown Iowa City. And 3 people got together and decided they were going to make Iowa City a startup community. 3 people, they started doing events, they started doing meetups, they started an accelerator. And a few years ago, they had their first accelerator graduation with 600 attendees and 10 companies. And so whenever I go and travel historically, people would say, hey, tell me about a startup community. And they think I'm going to talk about Seattle. And I end up talking about Iowa City. And people are always like, but Iowa City, where is that? So, like, well, it's one of the flyover states. So I had the same conversation, by the way. I was in Cairo 4 weeks ago. I took my 16-year-old son with me to Cairo to go mentor at a startup accelerator in Cairo. And they're always like, what should we do to improve Cairo as a startup community? I'm like, well, take Iowa City as the example, right? And because I always look at that and go, the team there, by the way, is an amazing team of 3 folks. One of them now works for the Kauffman Foundation. But the point of it is that you don't have to be a major city to have a startup community. But you do need to have some people who are committed to actually starting and doing the work. And that's the great thing is you get to kind of stand on the shoulders of giants of people who've gone before you in Seattle. So let's talk about the Seattle market specifically. One of the things Brad talks about in his book is you have leaders and feeders. And the feeders within the startup community ecosystem are things like government. So government's great. Typically my experience with government, this is just me. If there's anybody from the government here, I always find these humorous. Typically the government takes credit for the stuff that you and I go do. And that's totally cool because we want to get money to double down on stuff that we're doing that works. But in general, government is a support to what we're doing. And really, if they keep things out of our way, that's what we're after. That's really all we really want from a founder, entrepreneur perspective. So they're important, and they're part of the ecosystem, but there's typically a trailing part of the ecosystem. Universities are amazing because we create amazingly smart students who are ambitious and want to go do stuff, which is why some of you are here, which is great. Some of you are aged out of the student thing, but always learners like me, so that's cool too. But universities typically, first-time students that are getting out and starting ideas are not solving big B2B business problems. So the entrepreneurship programs are there, there's great entrepreneurship access, but typically they're not starting big companies, they're typically joining early stage companies. All of them are good. If you have an idea, pursue it. But know that it's again part of the ecosystem, not necessarily the lead in the ecosystem. Investors and angels and VCs, ultimately we follow talent. So VCs take credit for our timing was really good in your investment. The fact is you do all the work. We're following talent and putting money behind where there's momentum and investing in ideas and investing in founders. But the heavy lifting is the founder's work, it's not the investor work. So if you hear investors taking credit for the great things they've done, generally run away from that investor. Because we have to recognize, as a 5-time founder for me, as an investor now, I'm investing in you. I'm investing in your momentum. I'm investing in your work. I'm not actually going to roll up my sleeves and do the work. I'm going to help you do the work. So we're helpful, but we don't make it, we're not actually doing the work. Mentors, there's minimal economic reward for mentors. It's part of our thesis of how do we give back to the community. So if you have mentors over ask, and we'll talk about this later, it's about how do we contribute and invest in you. And knowing that there's minimal rewards for that other than it's good for the whole ecosystem as a whole. The number of people who are like, I will give you options. I'm like, whatever. It actually doesn't matter very much because some of those options pay off, some of them don't. And if we really hit it off as a potential mentor, I may end up as an advisor, I may end up as a board member. But it really is it's really part of this long dating relationship that we want to do first, because ultimately you don't want to ask for somebody who's not going to be a good advisor or board member, and I don't want to join a company that I don't actually get to help. So the mentorship process is really how do we contribute. Legal and professional services, you need lawyers, you need accountants, you need people who can keep you out of trouble along those ways, but again, they're contributors to that. And the last one is big companies. So big companies have people who leave big companies and join and start small companies. We have a problem in Washington State compared to California. Our non-compete agreements are completely onerous and need to be changed. If you think of an idea while you're working at Amazon, that idea belongs to Amazon. That's true of many large companies, including Microsoft. My opinion on it is it is in the way of us doing more innovation in Washington State. One man's opinion, I just happen to be right on the topic. It's just something we need to change. So if you look at California, if you work for Oracle, you can go to work for, you can't take trade secrets with you. That's not the point of the non-compete. But if you have an idea while you're at Oracle and Oracle's never going to pursue it, you should be able to go follow that idea and go start your own startup. Here people read that document from Amazon and go, I can't go start it. And it's like, that's really a bummer, because that's not really the intent, and it's not really defendable, but it's enough to keep people scared from starting their own startups. So it's quite the debate we have. I'm on the board of the Washington Technology Industry Association. Many of our member companies completely disagree with me on this topic, and that's okay. But I come at it from a founder perspective. Events. So the definition of startup events, by the way, are cheap or free. And even if you get to ones like this, it's like, wait, we even feed you. That's crazy. Expensive events are not startup events. Like, I love GeekWire, but some of the events that GeekWire does is incredibly expensive. Like, if you had to spend $600 on a ticket for a GeekWire event, or spend $600 on advertising to prove your idea, spend it on your idea. Like, go hang out in the lobby of the hotel and try to meet somebody if you really need to, but those are not startup events. So my definition is actually pretty easy. If you have an expense account and an American Express card that your company is paying for it, that's not a startup event. And if you could spend that money better on advertising, driving traffic to your site to prove out your idea, spend it there. Most of the startup events we do are cheap or free, and frankly, one of the things we try to do as a startup community is when people come in and like, we have this really expensive startup event, I'm like, I won't promote it. They're like, well, why not? I'm like, because it's a stupidly expensive startup event. So a couple of years ago when I was running Startup Week, I know I just participate in it now. Thankfully, I've got it handed off. I ran it for about 4 years. So somebody's like, concurrently we have this amazing event going on for blah, and tickets are only $600 and we'll give you a discount. I'm like, no, you totally missed the point of the Startup Week. The point of Startup Week is one ticket for $35 gets you into everything. So the idea there is that it's really to help you figure out the ecosystem in a week versus taking 6 months or 12 months to figure out all the meetups you should or shouldn't go to. Okay? New Tech is a great example. By the way, you can look at meetup.com. I think when Brett and I started talking about New Tech a few years ago, there were probably 300 meetups every month in Seattle. I would guess now there's probably 500 meetups. So if you are interested in blockchain, there's meetups. If you're interested in healthcare IT, there's meetups. There's meetups for everything. And if you don't find one and you're passionate about a different topic, start one. But New Tech Northwest is a great example of, it's a big block party. If you show up in a suit and tie, totally cool, you're welcome. If you show up in jeans and a t-shirt, totally cool, you're welcome, right? New Tech is a way for people to connect with other people in the community, sometimes around startups, sometimes around jobs, but it's just a great example of a great meetup it's reasonably priced, right? And it gives you a chance to go and connect. Startup Weeks and Hackathons are amazing events. There's an event called Ignite. There's tons of other events in the community already that's happening. You just need to go actually do the work. Yeah? It originally pivoted from the New York idea, and they were running it in Boulder as well. Now Brett runs it in Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, and I think Tacoma. So thematically they're the same, and he definitely learned a lot from the other events that were going on. So Brett Green runs it today. He's a great community guy, originally from Boulder, actually. Kind of funny enough, it was one of those, hey, this is kind of working in Boulder. We should try it in Seattle. When he got to Seattle, he's like, I don't know anybody. And I'm like, run an event. Now Brett knows everybody. So it's amazing. Resources. So one of the things, anybody subscribe to Startup Digest? All right, subscribe to Startup Digest. Startup Digest is a weekly email. It comes out on Monday, and it has a list of all of the events that are going on in town. If you have an event, you can submit your event to Red and the Startup Digest team, and they will promote it for you. So Startup Digest was a property of Startup Weekend. It used to be on my product team. And the idea there is any city you go to, you can basically plug in and start watching what's going on in the market, in the community. The San Francisco list is massive. The Seattle list is pretty good too. But basically, you can subscribe to that email newsletter. WTIA, who I just joined the board of, WTIA Programs for Startups, you can find there. It's the WTIA Startup Club. Has a community calendar as well, and we're continuing to promote more events for those. So the reason I joined the board there and became the chair of the Startup Programs was one of the things we wanted to do was level up Seattle, so that how do we encourage you to do bigger things and take on bigger challenges? So the first way we did that was we copied an idea actually from Victoria, Canada, you'll see a theme here for me around when I go to a city, I ask people in the community leader, like, what are you doing that's working? What did you do that didn't work? Because I don't want to do the shit that didn't work. I want to try the stuff that did work. So in Vancouver, there's a super active startup community. In Victoria, they're on an island with 350,000 people with 0 institutional investors. So there's not a single VC on the island. And they're like, well, we decided that our founders kind of needed to connect with each other so that when they wanted to go raise money off the island, they knew who to talk to. I'm like, that's a super cool idea. Can we copy it? And they're like, great. So we had 118 companies apply. We accepted 24. We're going to do it twice a year. And what we're doing for those 24 companies is we're pulling them all into a room. And bullying would be too strong of a word. Strong arming might be accurate. We got all of the VCs and all of the investors to come one day and meet with all 24 of those companies at one time. So the goal was, here are all the resources you need for these 24 companies to understand what's available to you in Seattle, and we're just parading them through. So instead of you having to go around and meet with all of the VCs, we just brought all the VCs in. So on a quarterly basis, we're doing similar things. So it's free for the startups. It's really us investing in you as founders. There's no cost, there's no equity. It's our way to pay it forward for the community and invest in you. So if you want to apply to be part of the second cohort, that'll be coming up in about 3 months. So subscribe to the WTIA list. Again, our goal with WTIA there is WTIA makes its money on selling memberships to big companies like Microsoft, but we use the access to big companies to find sponsors to support startups. It allows us to play long ball. So ultimately, the group question is check the motivations of the group and follow the money. There are some good groups, there are some less than good groups. Check the motivations and follow the money, and that typically tells you the tale of who they are and what they're trying to do. So play bigger. I talked about the Victoria model. So let me talk about what our outcome is and what our goal is with the cohort. So anybody heard of the PayPal Mafia? Okay, for those of you who haven't heard of the PayPal Mafia, there's a group of folks that were originally part of that co-founder team. Happened to be Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. There's a few amazing people if you look at the list. Reid Hoffman, sorry to say Blackburn. I'm like, I don't know where that one came from. So this amazing group of people who co-invested in each other because they knew you. So our goal with the cohort is, since we don't have a PayPal Mafia here, our goal is to invest in you so that 5-10 years from now, when you exit a company and somebody else starts a company and you've been part of the cohort for 5 or 10 years, you're like, oh, I know him. I'm going to totally invest in him. Oh, I know her. She's amazing. She should join. We should connect you guys. It's an amazing team. So we have a very long ball approach to this. We want to create Seattle's PayPal Mafia that doesn't exist. But you can't do it based on economic returns because it's going to take too long. So we're doing it from WTIA because we don't need to make any money at it, which is awesome. So we're bringing those folks together, 2 cohorts a year, structured events and unstructured events. The meta here for you who are doing startups are all-consuming, right? For those of you who heard anyone, you're like, yes. So what happens is we tend to auger in and not look around at what's going on around us, which is tough when it comes to recruiting because you need to be aware and connected to what's going on. So this gives you a chance to be connected with people who are at similar stages of your startup asking similar questions. And because you don't have to pay professionals to do that, I can learn from the cohort as well as learning from a professional or learning from somebody who's already done it. So being part of a cohort, just it'll help keep you sane, which is really important. And you'll be a great resource for each other. So encourage you to look at that. Great book on the topic, Play Bigger, is a great book that I read last year, and it's written by 3 folks in the Valley talking about how do you create a new category and how do you become that category killer. And so if you're interested in that one, that definitely gets us on the funding side pretty excited because you're like, I see how that could become a new category versus like, oh, you're the 6th person in this category. I'm not super excited about that one. So good book recommendation. I'm quirky on books, by the way, so discount appropriately. My goal is 100 books a year. So it became a weird goal a few years ago. Physical resources, you're in one now. There's a makerspace 1 floor down. There's amazing other co-working spaces and verticals like Cambia Grove. When I started my first startup in '98, none of this stuff existed. There was a group of 10 of us who got together about it once a quarter and looked at each other and said, I don't know, what would you do? Because it's not like Bill G or Jeff was like, we're going to give back to the community. They were kind of busy at the time. So, we were just trying to figure our way along, and the startup community didn't exist. Some people would say it's not great yet, and my answer is come become part of it and make it great. It'll get better with you rather than without you. There's a consistent theme. So let's just talk about you and make that transition. And one of the things I would encourage you to know is that your need for capital has no correlation to your ability to raise capital. So one of the things is I talk to founders frequently, they're like, well, Dave, you don't understand, I need the money or I can't do this. And the answer is, well, you'll never raise money that way. So one, you don't need permission from anybody else to go do the work. Two is your need for money doesn't mean I will write you a check. We all have rubrics we use, sometimes in our head, sometimes real rubrics that say, how do we score this team? So I've written about that. I'm happy to push that out to you all as one of the blog. Like, here's the 10 criteria that VCs use to value your business. If you're a 2 on 4 of those criteria, you're not going to get funded. And rather than have you guess what the criteria is, I just wrote a blog post about the rubric. Like, here's the rubric. Like, we score things slightly differently and weigh things differently, but your need for capital doesn't mean you'll be able to get capital. So what you have to do is be prepared to raise capital. There's programs for that. Obviously, the Entrepreneurship Program here is awesome. Seattle U has an Entrepreneurship Program. I started a program a year ago called 6 Month Startup. It's a meetup. Starts again in January. It's 6 months of deliverables that you have to go hit the milestones on so you can be prepared to raise money at the end. Cohort 1 has raised over $1 million already, which I thought was amazing. It was my way to not have to do 15 coffees a week with somebody who had 3 amazing ideas. So starts off with about 75 people, wanders down to about 45 people by month 4, because you have to go actually do the work. If you don't go do customer development interviews and you don't hit the deliverables, you don't get to talk to the mentors. So the mentors love it because they only talk to the people who are actually doing the work. The founders who don't do the work 2 months in a row, I just ask you to leave. Because sometimes life gets in the way. Like, my wife's a cancer survivor, she's great today, but I mean, life sometimes gets in the way of doing the things, your startup and your idea. Most of the time, the idea is bad. And when you go do 50 customer interviews and 47 of them tell you, I don't know what you're talking about, or no, I wouldn't pay for that, or it's a vitamin, not a pain pill, then by month 4, a bunch of people are like, I've discovered that I'm not a failure, but this idea is bad. And I would encourage you to take that position. Kill bad ideas fast. Failing fast isn't pleasant. Like, don't fail fast, just be objective about the idea and kill the idea. So the way I ask that question at the end of every customer interview is, if this idea was to fail, why would it fail? Now, most founders don't want to ask that question because they only have one idea. Because they're like, I don't want to know why it would fail, it's my precious, right? And I'm like, no, I want to know, like, do you want to know in 6 years, 6 months, or 6 weeks? I want to know in 6 weeks, maybe 6 days. Like, if I go talk to 16 people and 15 of them go, that's a bad idea, here's why it will fail, right? My favorite one of showing up at an investor pitch, somebody's like, we're doing this. And I'm like, oh, like this company? And they're like what company? And I'm like, really? You didn't do the research and the competitive analysis yet to know that there's 3 companies that have been funded in your space already? And it's like, oh, we didn't know that. I'm like, that is just a blind spot that's so big as a founder. You're like, I love my idea. My idea is so beautiful. It's amazing. I don't need to even bother looking at competitive analysis because I'm so good at my idea. And that's just such an epic fail. So don't do that. So programs. Investors, here's a list of all the investors in town that like early stage deal. The Alliance of Angels have pitch events and prep events. Startups Meet Angel is a meetup that I run that's quarterly, that's kind of the very top of the funnel. Puget Sound Venture Club. Do not pay to present. For those of you who've gone to Keiretsu Forum or know about Keiretsu Forum, let me tell you about angel groups in general are fine if you have a lead investor and 50% of your round is closed. But if somebody wants to charge you $1,500 per location to pitch, run away. Like, they have a business model. Again, follow the money. Their business model is they make money by selling investors access to deals and by selling you access to investors. $50 for an application fee or something incredibly cheap, totally cool. $1,500 per city and you have to do 6 cities, totally stupid. So the team there doesn't like, so I'm at a point in my career that I just name names. So people early in their career, because Seattle's nice. right? No one says anything bad about it. I'm like, no, you just need to know. As a founder, don't waste your time there. It's bad use of time. Horrible use of resources. Early stage venture capital, Seven Peaks, that's me. Founders Co-op, over at Startup Hall, Flying Fish, Unlock Ventures. Later stage venture, Madrona, Voyager. Let me give you a quick tip though. I asked this question at Startup Week to my panel. I'm like, so why do you guys take meetings with super early stage companies if the smallest check you write is $3 million? Like, well, we don't want to miss a great founder. I'm like, but aren't you sending a super mixed message in the market? And they're like, yeah, but we don't want to miss a great founder. If it's a great founder with a great idea, we want to watch you for the next 18 months. I'm like, but the message to the founders are like, awesome, you're doing great. Tell me when you get traction. And then you walk away from that meeting going, that was an amazing meeting. They love me. And the answer is, no, they're watching you. They don't love you. They're not going to write a check. So what you have to do is map your stage with the stage of average check that's written. So in the case of most of these early stage, our average checks range from $250 to about $1 million. And we tend to syndicate those deals. We're happy to syndicate with each other. Everybody does, by the way, if you call me and say, hey, I'm talking with Chris at Founders Co-op and they're looking to lead our deal, my next phone call is going to be to Chris. There's a monthly angel call with the Alliance of Angels. Every deal that comes through, they're like, we really like this deal. I'm like, oh, I saw that deal. I thought it was overpriced. So we're all talking with each other. So you can create momentum, but don't ever create a fake sense of urgency. Not that any of you would ever do that, but never create a fake sense of urgency, because I'm just going to pick up the phone and call Chris. With Chris, it would just be a text message. He doesn't pick up his phone. Know the stage and what you're doing from a timing perspective relative to your fund. Okay? Introductions help, but they're not required. So you'll find me at events like this, Chris at events, Aviel at events like this, Andy Liu at events. Like, we're always out in the community because we want to meet you too. So if you have an introduction, definitely use it. The best introduction is coming from a portfolio company CEO. So if you know one of our portfolio company CEOs, ask for an introduction. That's always the best introduction. If you know a friend of a friend, ask for an introduction. But you can send me a cold email. You can send me a LinkedIn request. Just don't do it in a dumbass way. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, and by the way, you don't need permission to go pursue your business. So let me give you I want you to be in the top 10% of companies who we like to see. A lot of companies will bring me their deck and they'll give a pitch and they'll say, here's my deck and a pitch. And my question is always, is this deck and the financial model and everything you're doing dependent on us writing you a check or not? And if the answer is, we're going to go kill this whether you write a check for us or not, I'm super interested. If what you're saying is, I need permission from you in the form of a check to go pursue this before I can leave my day job or quit my consulting, then my risk is equivalent to your risk. If you haven't left your day job yet, you're not going to get a check. If you need permission from me to go be successful, you are not going to get a check. If you call me in 3 months and I say, hey, pull up your deck, and I said, you gave me this forecast. So I met with actually a founder today. He's like, remember last December, you guys gave us this feedback. And his feedback, his memory of the feedback and his response to the feedback was totally spot on. He's like, you told us to do these 3 things. I'm like, yeah, we did. He's like, we're crushing it on this one, we're crushing it on this one, and we're still ramping up on this one. I'm like, love that, right? Not because we're smarter, but because we've seen more deals. So if you don't have traction and you go get traction, do investors like it? Of course. Makes lots of sense. So introductions are helpful, not required. This is Seattle, it's a small town. This is a long life. All right, avoiding the leeches. These are some things you shouldn't do. Be aware that there are people who attend startup events and they're really kind of groupies, they're just hanging out. Some of them are looking for jobs. Some don't realize that you don't have money to pay them for a job. So, and don't know startups well enough to know that you're gonna get some equity and you're gonna get to work part-time, you're gonna work full-time for part-time pay with the hope that you'll get a job and get some equity. So just be aware that when you show up at some of those events, there's just some groupies that hang out there. They're not a great use of your time. There's folks who show up at an event to sell their stuff, but they were never actually a sponsor of the event, and they're just kind of working the room. Run away from those people. You should scold them, actually. It's kind of like the person who rolls their car into the middle of the crosswalk, it's like that's the type of person they are. So just know that's who they are. You're like, you're in the middle of the crosswalk, and they're like, what's your problem? I'm like, I'm trying to use the freaking crosswalk, right? Those people who show up and never sponsor anything and are just there to sell you services, remind them that no, they should just go. Fundraisers or professional introducers you should run away from. So the world in my world, we don't pay for fundraisers. If somebody comes to you and says, I can help you raise money, I know Dave, I can introduce you to Dave and Chris and blah, but we're going to take a percentage of what we raise. The answer is hell no. Absolutely not. Not legal. So what's interesting is you need to be a licensed broker-dealer. So we're talking FINRA licensed broker-dealer, or maybe real estate broker at very least, to actually be able to sign a contract to get paid to do that. So if somebody says they'll introduce you to all the investors in town and they're going to take a percentage of fee, run away. None of us, you can get access to all of us. Like all of us want to see a deal. But if somebody wants to get paid for those introductions, don't do it. So we have a group called Help a Seattle Startup, which is an old school listserv that Dan Shapiro started a few years ago. And this topic came up recently, probably a year ago now. And we see some traffic on it on occasion. Somebody will ask a question and somebody will weigh in, like, oh, you should do this. It's kind of like the old school version of Quora, right, within a private list. So he's like, hey, somebody said that they would help me raise money for a fee. And it was like 17 of us dogpiled into that. Like, no, don't do that. Like, run away from that person. They're horrible. Because if they end up on your cap table, we don't want them there. That's bad for you. All right, regional markets, couple quick things on Cascadia. There's lots of interesting things happening from a community perspective these days that weren't happening a couple years ago when I first gave this talk. Vancouver, BC, all the way to Bend, there's some really interesting dynamics. There's capital is more mobile than it used to be. And we recognize now there's better areas to build startup companies than it used to be. So a couple examples is Kitsap. Vibe Co-working is there. They were actually the first city to kick off 6-month startup. They called me and said, hey, we want to launch 6-month startup in Kitsap. I'm like, why? And they're like, well, 47,000 people ride the ferry every day to jobs in Seattle, and we think that some of them would like to do startups and stay here. And I'm like, that totally makes sense. Never really thought about it. So Spokane, if we're live streaming to Spokane, I think, for the Spokane shout out. Spokane's doing some amazing stuff in Spokane with both co-working space. There's the Mind to Market program is a grant of $25,000 for early stage companies. There's physical space there for you to use. They're doing really cool stuff in Spokane, and what we're trying to do is bring some of those together as best practices so that, hey, what Kitsap is doing, Spokane can do, and Spokane's already blazed the trail and some other stuff that Snohomish should do, and Tacoma's starting to do stuff, because I think all of us recognize that traffic here sucks. And there are better places in the state where you can like quality of life. Wenatchee may be one of them. They're doing some really cool stuff in Wenatchee. That's a big change over the last couple of years. So Snohomish is still early in that. What you have is this confluence of community builders and community leaders and economic development teams who are trying to figure out, like we didn't get HQ2, duh. I'm not sure you would have got HQ2 anyway, but why don't you invest in the people who already live in your communities to get them to do startups there and stay there and create jobs there? Like, that's how this really works, right? Stealing HQ2 is the coup of all time for whoever gets it. There's not a lot of HQ2s out there, just in case you missed it. But you can be part of that leadership. So how do you plug in? This is a text reminder that your account is overdrawn on the right, in case you're wondering. So the first thing you do is give first. Show up at an event, ask how you help, volunteer, do a check-in, help with social media, help with Startup Week, help at a hackathon, but go give first versus taking first. It's great when I see somebody who I've seen them at multiple events and they're like, hey, I've met you at so-and-so. I was actually at a coffee shop today and someone's like, hey, I met you in Tacoma. I'm like, great. I don't remember your name because I was on stage, and that's always tough because you guys have the unfair advantage, right? And then you're like, hey, I'm old. Like, I can't remember. Help me. Like, startup, badges are great sometimes. But give first, help the community, build relationships, volunteer. In a community, in a startup ecosystem, so a few years ago when we first did Startup Week, Uber came to us and said, hey, we would like to give you free rides for your special guests. And I'm like, well, you don't understand community, because in community, everybody is the special guest. Like there's no, like everybody's special. And I think that's one of the things from the startup ecosystem perspective, like why do I come and help? The answer is because you're special. But everybody in the startup ecosystem is special. There's no VIPs in the startup ecosystem. We're here to help each other and improve the overall market conditions and raise the level for all boats, right? So if you're one of those people that you're special and not everybody else is, quick word on that, like I'm investing in your company at a stage that I'm going to be likely on your board or on your cap table for 7 years. If you are an ass, I do not want to invest in your company. I'm going to be around it for a long time. And frankly, you don't want to invest in somebody who's an ass, right? You don't want me on your cap table if I'm a guy who's always a pain in the butt, right? You don't want me there either. So this is a relationship that we're forming, and it will take time. Have an agenda. I know you have an agenda, but know what it is. So how can I help you? I need introductions to people, or I would like to meet so-and-so, or hey, can you introduce me to so? I know you have an agenda, just tell me what it is. Because I'm a horrible mind reader. I've been married for 31 years. I'm not any closer today than I was when I started. Right? So have an agenda, it's totally okay. Within the context of Give First, that's not a conundrum. Like we know you have an agenda, that's fine. So add value to the people you meet, which is always how you lead with, hey, how can I help you? Right? Versus lead with, hey, can you, right? So as you meet with people, make sure you understand how you can help them. Make an introduction, right? It's like, hey, would you introduce me to so-and-so? Or like, hey, I think you should really meet. Be that connector person, because everyone remembers, oh, they were super useful. I introduced me to so-and-so. Have a minimum viable personality. So anybody know Fake Grimlock from Twitter? It's one of my favorite Twitter followers. Fake Grimlock is a dinosaur, so that always writes in all caps. So the idea is you can be white bread or you can be bacon. I remember bacon, but if you have no viable personality, and I'm like, yeah, I met that person, but there's nothing memorable. So don't create memorable, because that's always awkward, like super awkward. But if you're going to have a personality, at least remind me of what it is you do. If I can't repeat your message to my partners, I won't. If I don't remember what you're working on, or it's super jargony or buzzwordy or acronym-y, then the answer is, I'm like, human nature says no one wants to look stupid. So if you say, oh, do you understand? I'll be like, uh-huh. Because no one wants to look stupid. But if I can't repeat what you're working on to a friend who's looking for the thing you're trying to buy or sell or looking for a job, it's your job to make that easy for the people around you to repeat your message. What are you looking for? Co-founder, marketer, share your idea. One of the common things we hear from startups all the time is like, I think I send you a non-disclosure before I share them. No, that's such a rookie thing. Like ideas die from lack of exposure, not from overexposure. Start with a null hypothesis and then go share your idea. And you'll get good feedback, right, of why you should do it or why you shouldn't do it. But if you're like, oh, my idea is precious, I can't share it with anybody, then you won't be around the startup ecosystem very long. Be clear, be repeatable, talked about that. So this is my example of what not to do. So somebody sent me a note, I'll read you a quick one. Quick question, we're working on a new product and in the process of selecting people to interview, just answering several simple questions. Would you like to participate? I should redacted name. I'm not sure I'm useful. Can you tell me what you want to interview me about? And the response came back, we're building a CRM type of service and wanted to get people's feedback on how they communicate with their clients and other people. I'm 100% sure you would give some useful feedback. If you could meet up with me for 15 minutes, I'd really appreciate it. Let me know what place and what time would be. Like, whoa, over asking. So I just asked, what is it you're looking for? Like, because I was happy to refer that person to somebody else. But I'm like, are you looking for B2B or B2C or early stage customers? Or like, help me have context for how do I help you? The over asking one is always hysterical to me, which is like, we've never met, but whew. I'm like, it doesn't take a lot of relationship for me to respond, but it does take a little bit of relationship. So don't be the over asker. Send me an email I can forward to other people. In general, I think what you'll find is people in the community want to help. One of the things I'd encourage you, I'll make sure I send this link to it. There's a one called a forwardable email. Like, how do you create a forwardable email? So best example I ever had was one of my board members sent me a note and said, hey, would you introduce me to so-and-so? And I'm like, sure, of course. He's my board member. I love the guy. And immediately after I sent back the note, he sent me back the 2-paragraph intro email that was just super easy for me to forward. So I was reminding people that I have a 25-year-old son. I could send you a picture of him, what he looked like at 2. It would be true, but it wouldn't be accurate. And if I saw you 6 months ago and I thought you were working on this and you want me to write the intro email to Chris DeVore, I am so going to be wrong because it represents the 12-year-old version, right? It's what I think you maybe were doing. Make it super simple and people will do that work for you. It's super easy. So your ask is proportionate to your relationship. Don't ask me for investor interest. So I have about 120 angel investors on my list. If you're like, would you give me the names of? I'm like, no. It's taken me years to build a trusted relationship with 120 angels, plus limited partners, plus funds, plus I'm not going to give you introductions or a list. Your ask is proportionate to your relationship. You have to bring the relationship first, right? I got somebody spammed me on was super critical. It was a nutty person who showed up and wanted to pitch and didn't attend the 6-month startup thing. And then it was like, you're not helpful. And I'm like, dude, you're just you're yelling for a group of nobody's listening, right? And it was just one of those where I'm like, by the way, in the startup community, there is a fine line between wacky founder and crazy. Because here's the deal, 90% of startups fail. You all know that none of that math applies to you. It's amazing. I'm a venture capitalist who think I can pick better than all the other venture capitalists. By definition, that's delusion chasing delusion, right? So sometimes in that delusion, there's just some crazy people. And it's good to know who they are early, right? So you can just avoid that same conversation. Like we had the same conversation 6 months ago. You should not work on this idea anymore, it's bad. Gary Rubin's quote on his email signature is, time's your most valuable resource. I promise I won't waste yours. Gary's a super active angel in town, but this is his signature on the bottom of every email, right? Which is, I won't waste your time. Because you can earn back money you lose, but you can't earn back the time that you spent. So this is a picture of 1911. This is my grandfather. This is a Ford garage in 1911 in Camas, Washington. Now, there are no libraries named after our family. He closed this business too soon, but he started the first phone company in southwestern Washington, and then he closed that business too soon and ended up with a community grocery. There's a fine line between success and failure, but in 1911, he had the first Ford dealership in southwestern Washington. Amazing! I'm not a billionaire today. That wasn't successful. He was too early. The assembly line started in 1914. It was so close. Timing is everything. So in 1911, though, and by the way, this was the gas station because there was no gas stations. This was just 4 barrels of gas. That was it. So sometimes your market timing's good, sometimes your market timing's bad. In my grandfather's case, not so good. But failure is going to be part of the process. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It means the idea was a bad idea. So sometimes we make bad choices and bad mistakes too, but as a startup community, we have to recognize failure and embrace it, because if we don't, no one ever talks about it. One of the things we've tried to do is normalize the fact that people are going to fail. That's important to know. We want to continue to exit. We want to continue to mentor. I would encourage you to think about giving back to the community as you exit. Reinvest in the community. There's a group of us who've made a side commitment that for every exit we have, we'll continue to invest 10% back into the startup community here. We'd love for you to be a participant in that. There's no hard ask. It's just more of the reason Silicon Valley has the flywheel effect that it has is because people kept reinvesting back into their community of other people they meet. It started in 71. Ours did not start in 71, by the way. We don't have to be Silicon Valley. We just have to be the best Seattle we can be, or the best Spokane we can be. So be good at reinvesting in your community, but you don't have to pack up and leave and move to Silicon Valley to do it. We want you to stay here. We're super happy to help. Okay? Last thing is I want to point out, I didn't have it here at the end. From a mentorship perspective, I don't want to leave this off. Mentor people who don't look like you. For God's sakes. There's all kinds of amazing people out there. Get outside of your own micro community and invest in the community in general. So it's important that we do that, because if that's going to be our measurement of success. All right. Thanks, everybody. Questions?
You have a question? Question number one. We're using a microphone so the live stream so Ann can hear.
Good.
If you are an individual that is frequently asked to make connections, what is the appropriate way to rebuff people if you feel like they are doing the thing where they're asking you for all the connections and you like don't know them at all or anything like that?
So my usual response is just to be really straightforward and blunt, which is like, I understand you're asking, but I don't know you. So, and I don't take completely random coffees at this point, because I'd be, an over-caffeinated Dave is probably not a good thing. Like, it's just, so I point them to other events, like a 6-month startup, or I'll point them to a meetup. So I'll point them to other resources and say, if you do some of those things and hang out and we get a chance to meet again, I'm happy to see where I might want to start doing that for you, but you have to understand the relationships I've built over time have taken years, and I'm just not going to hand it over. And I think any reasonable person will understand that, and the fact that they're over asking says they're probably not a reasonable person, so use that as your first indication of a red flag. Like, maybe the wrong person. So, yeah, you're probably way nicer than I am at this point, which is probably good.
Question?
One in the back there.
So when you go about validating your idea,
Uh-huh.
and you said that you need to share it with people as much as possible,
Yep.
how do you get to that stage where you know that your idea is well validated enough? Because people would just give you a general opinion. Yeah.
So the process is called customer development. There's a lot of resources. So there's Lean Customer Development's a great book. 6-month startup set to do. That's part of the thing you're going to do every month when we do 6-month startup. Is you need to do 25 customer interviews a month, and you're going to do them in a structured format. So you're going to create a form and a survey and a Google form, and you're going to either walk people through that form where you can fill it out for them afterwards, or you can fill it out for them as you're going through the process. So one of the things I always tell people is, you have an opinion, I have an opinion, I have a checkbook. If you have data, I'm totally willing to change my opinion. But if it's just your opinion and my opinion, I win because I have a checkbook. But if you're like, well, yeah, I understand that, Dave, you may not know this, but I've talked to 67 people and 55 of them said they would buy it. And be like, oh, well, tell me more. Right? I'm willing to change my opinion if you have data. And the way you get data is you go talk to people and go, is this important? Would you spend money on it? Because what you're really after is it a pain pill or is it a vitamin? And a pain pill is, I have to have that. And a vitamin's like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. So get the data and go do that structured customer interviews. That'll be a big help. Other questions?
Hi, yeah,
Hey.
you mentioned the Play Bigger, and I haven't read it. I haven't even heard of it before, but it sounds interesting. You know, having competition is great because it validates an idea, but you don't want to have too much competition. What do you do if you're doing something that has no competition and, like, you know, is basically creating a new category?
Yeah, so the competition is really interesting. So there's market timing issues, and one of the resources I'd point you all to is Bill Gross did a video on market timing. So it's probably the best 7-minute video on startups on the web. But one of the things he talks about is your market timing. Do you have headwinds or do you have tailwinds? And the idea there is that if you're going into a market that's been overfunded, and there's tons of competition, then the answer is none of the investors want to touch it because the market's already taken lots of money. If you're going into a market that's new and the competition is really the status quo, right? People keep doing the same thing that they're doing and yours is really innovative. You really have to go out and get the customer development to say, okay, what's the features you really need to launch with so that you can do that? It also influences your sales strategy. So if you're doing a new product in a new category, no one's actually out searching for your thing, right? Which means you're going to be focused on outbound marketing, not inbound marketing. You're going to have to focus on outbound sales, not inbound traffic. So you're not going to be able to buy Google AdWords on the topic. So it changes your marketing and sales strategy, but it also changes your how do you position strategy. So you'll always have competition for something. The competition may be do nothing. The competition may be status quo. It may be forms or Google Excel spreadsheets or like. So you always need to frame up some competition because it's seldom I've seen I don't think I've ever seen one that didn't have any competition of any kind unless there was no market there. I've seen lots of those where people are like, we have no competition. I'm like, that's because there's no market, or the market won't pay you for it. So I think it's a matter of framing and making sure you understand it, but you never want to walk into a meeting and say, we have no competition, because the first thing I'm like, you clearly haven't looked hard enough yet, is going to be the answer. And if you say, hey, the competition is status quo and Google Sheets and Excel spreadsheets, Smartsheet exists because people used Excel for a shit ton of stuff they weren't designed to use Excel for, right? So that's why Smartsheet exists today. And it's like, if you went back and say, well, our competition is kind of status quo, it's like, oh, I get that. Is it a big market? Will be the next question. And the answer is, yeah, it's big because of this, right? Because you're looking for a way to triangulate what's called your total addressable market, or your TAM. And if you have no competition, it likely means sometimes there's no TAM, right? So lots of great blog posts on that topic as well. Okay. Yeah, back in the back. Make you run around on it today.
This is a question from Spokane.
Hey, Spokane.
How do early stage startups get access to government agencies which require lots of traction before they usually want to talk to companies?
That one is the same as enterprise. Healthcare IT is particularly notorious for this sales cycle. Enterprise IT is notorious. So the question is, how do you get or government? And the answer is you can. It's really hard to do an MVP and a minimum viable product if you really need a full solution. So the question is, who are the advocates within those government departments, the enterprise, or especially healthcare IT, where I look at the sales cycle is super long. So what I'm looking for in that case, if you can't build the full product, is letters of intent, customer validation, feedback from people that says, hey, we love this idea. It obviously is not at a point we can buy it yet. One of the things we do in due diligence, and everybody does in due diligence, is we'll call your customers. And we want them to, if the customer's like, this is the best thing we've ever had, and even if they're like, this is the best idea and we're just going to be on your advisory board, or we'll be part of your advisory panel because it's non-compensated from the government perspective. Again, I'm looking for opinions that help validate your idea rather than just your opinion. A good place to start.
Different type of question.
Go for it.
You said you read about 100 books a year.
I do.
That sounds like a lot of time. Do you listen to them or do you actually read them?
So to get through 100 books a year, the answer is Audible, ebook, and physical. The answer, and push, pull, or drag them in, they all count. I have a 50-page rule. So if I get 50 pages into something, I'm going to finish it, which has been bad a couple times. Like every once in a while, I'm like, I got to, one author was like, what's really important is you just follow your passion. And I'm like, oh my God, that's like if that's the only vector you're going to choose your career life on, I'm like, you're making a horrible decision. So I closed that one and didn't count it. But I don't count it, it has to get through the end. So last year I did about 4 books on data science, so I ended up writing a blog post breaking down all of the books. And if you're a reader, follow on Goodreads. So my first rule of thumb on Goodreads is if it doesn't start with 4 stars, I'm not going to try it. And I always ask people when they say, oh, I have a favorite book. I'm like, is it a favorite or is it recent? Because sometimes they're like, people want to connect on like, oh, I'm a reader, you're a reader, that's awesome. And they have a recency bias, so the thing I just finished. And I'm like, was it a favorite book or was it like a recent book? So yeah, I'm about 65% nonfiction is kind of my, Daniel Rossi and I started this. Daniel Rossi's the chief business officer for GeekWire. And a couple years ago on New Year's Eve, we were talking about how many books do you read? 30, 35. Did you ever have a goal? I'm like, oh, that's really, no. So somewhere during the second bottle of wine, it became a goal. And we decided to do 100, and that's just kind of kept going. So, but I don't spend a lot of time watching Mariners games or Seahawks games at this point.
Thanks.
Yep.
Anyone else?
All right. Going once, going twice.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dave Parker.